Chapter 4. Missing Introduction. Dynamics, running against the wall or dropping off the wall. To share what we have felt physically and mentally. Lack of explanation of the dynamics. How our body responds to stress. In order to understand the body's response to certain environmental stimuli, it is necessary to understand the human organism as an interrelated whole. Despite the complexity of the systems that encompass mind, brain, and bodily response, we can find a common ground with which we inevitably sympathize: stress. This can be considered the great disease of our time insofar as we all experience it to a greater or lesser extent in our daily lives. We can begin to observe that this bodily response called stress is caused by a continuous bombardment of negative and limiting biased thoughts that are generated randomly, without permission, in our mind. In the face of this indiscriminate flow of uncertain thoughts, we remain on guard against the threat of possible impending danger. Such a threat is not necessarily a warning of a risky situation, but rather we live an anachronistic, outdated experience. We do not relate to reality, but to our thoughts about it. It is our fearful interpretation, from our way of thinking, that we create our own demons on a daily basis. To be more rigorous when we talk about stress, this is not quite correct. We should actually distinguish between eustress and distress. And our way of thinking can activate one or the other mechanism. The endocrine system provides us with a cocktail of hormones that transmit information throughout the body. We refer to eustress as the ability to become active and to face challenges. In this state, hormones such as adrenaline and noradrenaline are secreted, which maintain interest and a feeling of vitality, and invite us to fight, to confront, to face danger. Other hormones such as dopamine promote the ability to focus attention and provide pleasurable sensations. Serotonin generates a feeling of confidence and calm in the midst of a challenge. Oxytocin and beta-endorphin reduce cortisol levels in the blood, bringing feelings of pleasure and affection. When we refer to the famous stress, we rather mean distress, which is the inability to cope with challenges. The main hormone secreted is cortisol or fear hormone, which invites paralysis or flight. It appears within 90 minutes of the disappearance of the previous hormones and causes exhaustion, irritation, lack of concentration and memory, fear, hopelessness, and disillusionment. It weakens the immune system and prevents the brain from regenerating new neurons, neurogenesis. In states of distress, with the residue of cortisol, we feel unable to cope with challenges. Curiously, this is a peculiar feeling because it is addictive as the body becomes accustomed to the rhythm imposed by cortisol. As a consequence of this, we can name some of the symptoms: impoverishes metabolic function, leading to inflammatory processes. The blood supply to the brain is reduced and the integration of the functions of both hemispheres is altered, making reasoning, attention, decision-making, learning processes and creativity more difficult. Memory experiences a slow and progressive paralysis. A phenomenon can occur in which the memory only starts to bring back negative records and the imagination shows gray, dark and threatening worlds. The role of inflammation in depression is now also well known. Recent studies suggest that stress suffered in childhood, following oppressive experiences such as bullying, abuse and isolation, causes inflammatory processes that can lead to all kinds of mood disorders and a greater propensity to suffer depression in adulthood. One of the biggest stimuli that our body receives is the type of food we eat. Our digestive system has to manage a large amount of pro-inflammatory foods that we ingest. This, together with the inflammatory effect of cortisol, alters the intestinal barrier, making it more permeable to certain substances that damage the immune system. There is also an inhibition of sex hormone formation, leading to a powerful decrease in libido. More and more scientific research is pointing in the direction of looking at the emotional domain, and in particular stress, as risk factors in the development of cancer. Some of the psychological origins of distress may be the difficulty to say no without feeling guilty, not having clear priorities and letting others decide for one, the lack of courage to stand up for our values, and the difficulty to communicate honestly and express our emotionality. The causes should be sought in the basic distrust in life that is generated in the first stage by the lack of unconditional love. Some of the resources, after a process of inner experimental awareness of causes and origins, can be found in the awareness of the present moment, connected breathing, and laughter, which is able to reduce or make distress disappear. Distressing memories caused by COVID-19. If we were to think back to the start of the school year after the pandemic, we would be haunted by doubts, uncertainty, and the abyss. Adults and children, trying to control the fear and the emptiness in our stomachs. The vertigo awakened by what we were experiencing versus the desire to be reunited, watered by the time of distance. Understanding psychological fear as a generator of anguish is essential, for which we have to go back to its genesis. Fear as a generator of anguish. The emotional bond has two functions: to guarantee survival and to serve as a protective membrane and secure basis for the development of the main vital impulses such as love, freedom of being, knowledge, and creativity. To the extent that mother-child separation occurs in the first stage, following the trauma of the rupture, a psychic and emotional wound is produced, which becomes what has come to be called basic lack. Psychological fear makes its appearance as we feel that the essential vital environment may be missing, like a fish that has been taken out of the water and put back in. In this state of rupture, fear conditions everything. We go through a state of shock, a state of freezing of the soul. There is a lack and a fear of lacking. The creature's desiring capacity, which is its driving force, is replaced by lack, by unsatisfied need. A need that will be controlled by administering physical contact, regulating it, dosing attention. Babies are driven by desiring and necessary impulses, they perceive time as eternity, and if there is a dosage of attention through separation in the hospital at the moment of birth, and later with the use of the cot, the chair, the pram, regulated breastfeeding or not breastfeeding, and, especially, unattended crying, this psychic and emotional wound is intensified, which subsequently generates a bonding disorder. In a secure attachment, the child's wishes are met, there is affection and trust. This attachment supports exploration and sociability, inhibits fear, and promotes independence. But when there is an attachment disorder and the attachment is insecure, the child's desires are not met, there is no trust, there is pain and anger, and the desires become unmet needs. Insecure attachment inhibits exploration and sociability, fosters fear and creates dependency, compulsive behaviors, and addictions. Desire as a motor drive is transformed into unsatisfied need, into anxiety, and the fear of lacking the vital environment sets in. As a consequence, we spend our lives seeking to fill the lack with dependent behaviors that force us to hide our essence, and adulterate our genuine vital impulses. This state of lack and need, which generates anguish and anxiety, makes us manipulable. By actions such as allowing a baby to cry in a cot, we subordinate the baby's well-being to what we believe is right for its upbringing or necessary to keep our family structure in order, but we inflict on the child such suffering that it turns into despair, which in turn generates in it a psychological and emotional state of submission. In this state, the child will submit to the will of the adult in order to obtain the minimum attention that will allow it to survive. Submission, which is the fundamental ingredient without which this oppressive neoliberal system could not survive. Many mothers and fathers, probably trying to do what they consider best for their child and, sometimes against their own instinctive impulse, with the suffering that this self-denial inflicts on them, have followed the advice and practices of psychological disciplines such as those promulgated by Edouard Esteville in his polemic book Sleep, Child. The logical thing is that they cry, scream, vomit, kick, say, thirsty, hungry, pupa, I don't love you. Whatever it takes to get you to bend, but don't even flinch. And if you find it very hard, think that you are doing it for their health and that of the whole family. She will probably be crying her eyes out at that moment. Don't listen. Carry on talking as if it were nothing. It doesn't take much for a child to vomit, and even if he hits himself something that may alarm you at first, and rightly so, he won't hurt himself and will let it go as soon as he realizes that you don't give him any importance. You must leave the room before the child falls asleep. You don't have to help him fall asleep by rocking him, caressing him, or having parties. Put your child to sleep is scientific, it works. I am not a guru or a preacher. My only merit has been to put into very easy words the scientific knowledge about sleep. For an innocent child, who is defenseless and totally dependent, every abuse, every intolerance, every lack of attention is experienced as abandonment. As adults and those responsible for a child, we will pretend, without realizing it, that they will also repress what we have repressed, otherwise they will awaken everything that we have needed to send into the shadows. If we have had to repress the cry and the need claim through it and have had to hide the emptiness, the abandonment, the pain felt, It will make us uncomfortable to listen to a baby's cry because it will automatically connect us with our own repressed cry. The discomfort derives, then, from this, not from understanding the demand of the child. In fact, insensitivity to a baby's anguished, heart-rending and desperate cry is our protection mechanism, which is why the methods of letting the baby cry are so successful. Consequently, with this experience of submission that generates a perverse dependency, we develop attitudes such as attachment, which becomes our primary behavior, clinging to things or people without whom we think we could not be happy. We also develop an egocentric sexuality that has nothing to do with the drive of desire as a motor capacity. At the base of our emotional psychology, two emotions are installed that will mark the guidelines of our life: the shame that what we are is defective and does not deserve love just for being, and the emotional shock with a constant residue of fear of abandonment. To survive in the face of this pain and helplessness, mind-linked coping mechanisms emerge that seek to protect us, but develop an identity separate from what we once were and that remains within us. The ego, the psychological self, the identity, the character, the armor are a reaction, a survival mechanism in the face of adversity. It is a response to fear. Fear that, if ignored or denied rather than acknowledged, is relegated to the back of the mind, where it exerts a powerful effect, dominating all aspects of our lives and contaminating our relationships. In adulthood, the fear of being abandoned and deprived surfaces when we become emotionally close to another person. And, if we are able to bond, it also surfaces when we need to separate. The idea of parting is terrifying because we have no assurance that love will return, so we cling. Primal traumas buried in the unconscious are the cause of this separation anxiety. We usually deny the fear, we judge it and fight it, we don't accept it. We are terrified of such vulnerability. The point is that, without acknowledging it, remaining in a state of struggle, we cannot reach our sensitive essential part, and we can spend our lives in a layer of protection without going deep, armored, anesthetized, without touching or being touched, where there is no encounter, self-deluded, maintaining our character without having a deep understanding and acceptance of all that lies underneath. Angustias. We call angust the set of confused information and distorted reality that remains in the brain after experiencing an intense situation that has not been able to be relieved and, therefore, neither processed nor stored properly. This confused information has a life of its own in our mind. It does not remain in our brain passively or harmlessly. In fact, they affect us deeply, both consciously and unconsciously. This confusing information, distress and its damage have certain common characteristics. Knowing their peculiarities and functioning is very useful to support us in our personal emotional work. The characteristics of all anxieties are: anxieties return to our minds again and again. When something difficult, stressful, painful, surprising, intense or strange happens to us, our brain will keep returning to that event, over and over again, until we are able to get rid of the residual confusing information, venting and distressing feelings attached to its memory. Even if we try to forget, meditate, relax, concentrate on something else, anesthetize or distract ourselves, every time we stop, the first thing our mind will do is try to redirect our attention to the memory that still needs to be processed and stored, so that we do it correctly. We have been trained to ignore these events, to give them any kind of meaning, to control them, normalize them, accept them and learn to live with them. In other words, we are pushed to accept the harms and their consequences, instead of learning to process and store them properly in our minds. Distresses are really persistent, they come back again and again to our minds, until a stronger distressing event occurs. Then, the first one loses attention and hides deeper in our mind, in the unconscious. Anxieties make us believe in a distorted version of reality. Every present distressing feeling is an old experience loaded with unprocessed, confused information. Because we were not able to extract the potential learning from the original experience, and have it at hand in its corresponding information store in the mind, we are left with residual confused and distorted information stuck. Thus, anxieties confuse our mind into believing that the original recorded messages from previous harmful experiences and their attached feelings are appropriate for the current situation, leaving us with a distorted perspective of reality. In the beginning, when we are young, it is easy for our mind to function correctly and not be so confused by these messages. But as time goes by, the confusions accumulate and begin to settle in our mind, hindering it. we begin to doubt our own judgment and are unable to recognize how we should feel or act in certain circumstances, and end up living a life dominated by installed messages and settled distressing perspectives. In the end, we buy into this distorted information. Anxieties make us forget who we really are. The moment we completely believe the distorted information, we forget how we really were when we were born, who we really are, and how we perceive the world around us. It is possible that, occasionally, we live without the influence of this established confusion, and for a moment we remember who we really are. These are precious moments, although it can also be hard to realize what we have lost along the way and what we have become in the end. The anxieties are true to the message that was recorded. When we live using well-processed information and without our mind being influenced by distressing information, we can easily use our intelligence, behave and think in a fresh and flexible way, adapt to new situations and give appropriate responses to any situation. However, when our mind is under the influence of any distress, we behave in a rigid, clumsy, stale and repetitive way. These messages of distress that we believe as if they were true, and that were recorded as a consequence of a previous unrelieved intense situation, can be dismantled by simply contradicting them, with a message contrary to the one we believe, or by changing our tone of voice or body position to one contrary to how we feel. If we do this correctly, some kind of emotional release will appear, automatically. For example, most people are affected by distress related to our body image. Distress messages make us believe that we are not attractive enough, that our bodies are not as they should be, legs too thin, belly too big, skin not smooth, nose crooked, too much or too little hair, hair too curly, pimples, etc. In various ways, distress makes us believe false messages that make us feel insecure and bad about our bodies. So, a very simple way to contradict these messages is, for example, to stand in front of a mirror and say out loud, in a fresh, playful and proud tone of voice, "Look how beautiful, what a great body, or, that tablet is going to make them swoon. Ooh yeah," or other similar messages. We can also exaggerate some appreciative body movements and poses, winking, sensually touching our body, pointing to the mirror, biting a lip, etc. And use a light and lively voice. In this way, we are directly contradicting the distressing messages and thus dismantling them a little. If we manage to find the right contradictory message for a particular distressing belief we have, whether physically, verbally or mentally, and use it successfully and regularly, one of our recovery mechanisms, whether laughing, crying, yawning or shaking, will immediately and automatically appear. Anxieties strengthen and defend one another. The mind, under the right relaxed circumstances, can easily process information, comparing new information with old data and thereby generating new, more complex content. Unfortunately, in a similar way, new, unprocessed, confusing information joins the old, strengthening it and generating a disturbing web of data, which becomes more and more confusing. Thus, depending on how long some distressing messages and feelings, distresses have been with us, it may be more or less difficult to work on them, as some distresses defend and support others, making them more resistant. To explain this better, we will return to the previous example of anxieties about our physique. So, it may happen that if we attack that anxiety, contradicting it by making faces in front of the mirror and giving compliments, other anxieties will quickly come to our mind, with new messages such as, "Stop making a fool of yourself, don't be a fool, you're wasting your time," etc. In the same way, if after contradicting that anguish, we start to vent, other inhibiting messages will remind you that, "It's no big deal, men don't cry, don't exaggerate, you're a drama queen," etc. We call all this set of resistances inhibitory anxieties, as they hinder and interrupt our venting. Chronic distress is invisible. When a set of distressing information and feelings has become chronic, we cease to recognize their existence and their influence on our lives. In other words, they are constantly re-stimulated and their messages affect us in various ways, without us realizing it. In such situations, we act automatically, as if it were our natural way of behaving. But in reality it is a rigid response originating from a complex set of unconscious mechanisms based on accumulated, confusing and distressing information. When this happens, our conscious mind cannot perceive, nor identify the distress, as it seems, the norm, which prevents our rational mind from dealing with its effects. By residing in our unconsciousness, they become invisible to our eyes, making us unaware of their existence. It should be remembered that this only happens in the case of chronic distress. Fear. That is what neurosis consists in being afraid of life. The individual is afraid to open his heart to love, afraid to communicate or to fight, afraid to be entirely himself. Opening the heart to love makes us vulnerable to suffering. Communicating exposes us to rejection, to fight, to destruction. Having more vitality or more sensations than usual frightens the person who experiences it, because it implies the threat of overwhelming the I by overflowing its boundaries and undermining its identity. Being more alive and feeling more provokes fear. We keep busy so as not to feel, we run around all day so as not to face ourselves, or we get drunk on drugs so as not to be aware of our inner self. Because life scares us, we try to control or dominate it. We think it is bad or dangerous to let ourselves be carried away by our emotions. Neurosis is an inner conflict that stems from the family context and this, in turn, from the cultural context. The neurotic character takes many forms, but all involve an internal struggle between what is and what one thinks one should be. Central to the process of cultural adaptation is the control of sexuality, which results in the learning of guilt and shame, both of which contribute to neurotic character. Parents require their children to assume attitudes and behaviors that allow them to conform to the socio-cultural matrix. On the one hand, the child rebels against these demands because they imply the domestication of his animal nature. On the other hand, they want to comply with what is demanded of them in order to keep their parents' love and approval. The outcome depends on the type of demands and the way they are imposed. In most cases, the process of adapting the child to the culture breaks his spirit, making him neurotic and fearful of life. When the conflicting inner tendencies pull in opposite directions until they lose contact, a crisis occurs, which may eventually become psychotic. When we go deeper into the processes of inner inquiry, we come into contact with the origin of this inner struggle and, after the possibility of having understood, consciously felt and integrated it, we can decide to abandon it and surrender to the mystery of the organizing intelligence, making this neurosis or inner conflict unnecessary and anachronistic, and gaining peace of mind. Technique: My fear of others. Confronting fear. Introduction: Talk about expressions of fear, embarrassment, trembling, easy laughter, nervousness, sweating hands, blocking, verbosity. 1. We choose partners in a circle, thinking about who we are most afraid of. It may be because he/she reminds you of someone or because you like him/her and he/she makes you nervous, etc. 2. Stay with yourself for a while and think about choosing one person in the group with whom you are afraid. 3. Stand face to face. 4. You look each other up and down. Without talking, you decide who will always start doing the exercises. 5. While one remains motionless, the other circles around. Without touching it. Change. 6. Stand face to face again. Take a step back. Look at each other from a distance, from head to toe. Get as close as you can without touching or averting your eyes. 7. Now try to scare the other one with gestures, without touching her. Dare. You move away, then rush at the other, standing 2 centimeters away from her, scream. Change. 8. While your partner remains silent, you say your own name while looking at her. Repeat it several times slowly, raising the tone little by little, louder and louder. Shouting. Change. 9. Now do the same by saying his name. Repeat it several times slowly, raising the tone little by little, louder and louder. Shouting. Change. 10. Both of you at the same time. Stand face to face again, lean your foreheads against each other. 11. Turn your back to your partner, stretch your arms back and let her grab your wrists. Try to let go. Change. 12. Back up a meter and bend your trunk at a right angle, while the other hand keeps both hands on the back of your neck. Try to straighten up, while he prevents you. Over. 13. Both of you at the same time. Now take a cushion each and face each other. Push each other, try to take each other's place. You can shout to defend yourselves. 14. Stand face to face again, throw your arms forward and interlock your fingers with your partner's, and push her back. You can shout. 15. Face to face. Put your hands on your partner's face, touch her face, her hair. Do whatever you feel like doing to feel comfortable with the contact. Stop fighting and embrace your fear. Change. Biology of fear. The fear center is located in the cerebral amygdala, a physically small location, but very relevant in our life and behavior. The amygdala, according to recent studies, is active in pregnant women from the end of pregnancy. It has a great capacity to store emotional memories and reacts depending on the emotions that arise. It processes information related to emotions and warns the brain and the organism of danger, that something is wrong, activating the response or reaction of fear and anxiety. The hippocampus, central to memory and learning, encodes threatening or traumatic events as memories. When the brain perceives all reality as threatening, this is because the alert system has been hyperactivated. There are many memories or events that have a high emotional charge. This means that when we relive them, the neuronal connections are activated in such a way that the whole organism is affected: trembling, tachycardia, sweating, tachypnea, with the consequent rise in cortisol and adrenaline, which we will explain in more detail later on. Amygdala sequestration refers to those emotional responses that arise in an abrupt and exaggerated manner. When a stimulus is received, the body's reaction is excessive and explosive. It is not a mental problem as such, but an emotionally charged past event that blocks the sufferer, so that, faced with a current event that indirectly relieves it, the subject is unable to decide or reason clearly. The individual who responds in this way is overridden by his or her emotions. The neural networks that control confidence are exactly the same neural networks that control fear. It means that fear and trust are the same thing, they are two sides of the same coin. It means that we cannot feel fear and trust at the same time, either we feel fear or we trust. Autonomous nervous system and polyvagal theory. The autonomic nervous system is a common denominator in all humans. We all share the same biological behavioral platform. Its task is to ensure our survival in times of danger and our growth in times of safety. Survival requires the detection of threats and the activation of a survival response. Growing requires the opposite, the inhibition of a survival response so that social engagement, a loving bond with the environment, can take place. Unlike the somatic nervous system that controls all voluntary and motor parts of the body, the autonomic nervous system is the part of the nervous system that controls involuntary actions, such as heartbeat and the widening or narrowing of blood vessels. It is made up of two main branches, the sympathetic and parasympathetic, and responds to signals and sensations through three pathways, each with a characteristic pattern of response reacting in the service of survival. The sympathetic branch is located in the middle part of the spinal cord and represents the pathway that prepares us for action. It responds to signals of danger and triggers the release of adrenaline that fuels the fight or flight response. In the parasympathetic, there are the two pathways that travel within the vagus nerve, which etymologically means wandering, so it is a very apt name. From the brainstem, if you put your hand on top of the base of the skull at the nape of the neck, the vagus travels in two directions, down through the lungs and stomach and up to connect with nerves in the neck, throat, eyes, and ears. The vagus is divided into two parts, the ventral vagal pathway and the dorsal vagal pathway. The ventral responds to signals of safety and supports the feeling of being socially engaged and safely connected. The dorsal, in contrast, responds to signals of extreme danger. It disconnects us, bringing us into a state of protective collapse. When we feel paralyzed, numb or somewhere else, it is because the lazy dorsal has taken over. Both are essential for survival, but like everything else in life, they need to be in balance. The problem is that today there is no balance, we are more often in sympathy, as if there is a continuous threat to escape from. COVID and the whole pandemic context are the perfect stimulus to always feel under threat. Recent neuroscience research is demonstrating that the functioning of the nervous system determines both our vital sensations and the emotions and thoughts that accompany them. Consequently, our well-being depends entirely on the proper functioning of the nervous system. The various difficulties we encounter over the years in our lives can unconsciously disorganize our autonomic physiology, which means that at many times we feel anxious, overwhelmed, and sometimes even depressed for no apparent reason. At the core of polyvagal theory are three organizing principles. Hierarchy. The ANS responds to bodily sensations and environmental signals through three pathways that operate in a specific order and respond in a predictable manner. Neuroception. Unlike perception, this is detection without awareness. Tiny spies under our skin, joints, muscles, blood vessels detect signals of safety, danger, or threat inside our bodies. The story follows the state our body finds out before our brain does. Co-regulation is the biological need for reciprocal regulation between our autonomous states in order to feel safe and create trusting relationships. We come into the world configured to connect. But with our first breath, we embark on life in search of security, and the ANS is our personal surveillance system. Imagine it is a ladder. How do our experiences change as we go up or down? Dynamics. According to polyvagal theory, what provides a possibility of connection, curiosity, and change is a ventral vagal state and a neuroception of security. For this, it would be necessary to recognizing autonomous status, respecting the adaptive survival response, regular or irregular in a ventral vagal state, reframing history. To start, we can draw a ladder with the 3 states. Ask your nervous system and write the answers on the ladder to become aware of your autonomic states. My dorsal vagal system becomes strong when I run out of options, I feel trapped, I feel insignificant, I am criticized, I feel I don't belong. My sympathetic system is activated when I'm going fast, I'm being ignored, I'm confused, I'm being pressured, I'm close to a conflict, responsibility. My ventral vagal system comes alive when I think about people who are important to me, make my own decisions, am under the stars, enjoy someone's company. Behaviors resulting from survival biology. When we live with these distressing memories, we enter a state of distress, and all the mechanisms of survival biology are activated. A surviving mind is in a continuous state of alarm, what we call the amygdala hijack, because the amygdala is in a constant state of activation and sends continuous alarm signals to the rest of the brain. The body is therefore in check. This leads to a psycho-emotional imbalance that can flourish in different ways. In the face of these imbalances, defense and adaptation mechanisms emerge as a form of self-regulation. Although at first it may sound unfamiliar to others, self-destructive behavior is a common occurrence in our species Homo occidentalis. This behavior is based on everyday acts that may seem perfectly acceptable but are actually detrimental to one's own happiness. We have built a whole psychological support system to maintain this self-frustrating behavior. A pertinent question, based on logical reasoning, might be, what do I gain from this behavior, and why do I persist if it is detrimental to me? To answer this, one could quote the old saying, better the devil you know than the devil you don't. Essentially, it is safer to cling to a known response, even if it is self-destructive, because even the deepest fibers of your character resist change, rather than undertake the hard work of eliminating the thoughts that support your feelings and self-destructive behavior. These thoughts become habits that give us a sense of security, the world we know, the identity we have. It is terrifying to be confronted with new thoughts that can destabilize our familiar world, indeed, that can question the path we have carved out with sweat and tears. And that is what it all comes down to, that we have also become accustomed to tears. We are accustomed to a level of suffering, what Eckhart Tolle calls the pain body, which already has a life of its own and demands its daily dose. A dose that, among other sources, the television news is in charge of supplying through its incessant manipulation and deception that guarantees its high level of viewership. So, if we want to take charge and seek responsibility for our own actions, we must ask ourselves, why do I choose to be upset at this moment? Somehow, at an unconscious level, there is a choice in how you feel because it is linked to what you have been thinking. The emotion you experience as discomfort arises as a response, as a reaction to the thought. We tend to think that it is things or people that make us feel bad, but it is our thoughts about things and people that make us feel. For example, a young executive spends most of his time worrying and suffering because his boss thinks he is inept. Paul is very unhappy because his boss has a very poor opinion of him. But if Paul didn't know what his boss thought of him, would he be equally unhappy? How could he be unhappy about something he doesn't know? In other words, it is not what his boss thinks that makes him suffer, but what he himself thinks based on what his boss thinks. Another example with a taboo subject, the death of someone is not what makes you grieve. Until you found out, you could not have grieved, so it is not the death that causes you grief, but what you say to yourself about it. In short, you are responsible for what you feel. You feel what you think, and you can learn to think differently about anything if you choose to do so. Ask yourself if it's worth it, if it's worth being unhappy, depressed, hurt, or offended. As strange or unusual as it may sound, you can learn not to be unhappy, not to choose self-frustrating behavior. First, there is a cognitive part that has to do with moving from thinking out of inertia to conscious thinking. Then, as we will deal with later in this work, we have to go through the shell into the heart, to go deep into our biography to see, understand, touch, feel and express the wound, so that not only our thinking, but all our cells can realize and choose a new direction. I believe that happiness is the natural condition of a person. This becomes more evident when you look at young children. What is difficult is to get rid of all the shoulds and would have tos that you have digested in the past. And even more difficult is not to run away from the pain. With regard to what is difficult for us and what we get discouraged about, you can remember, for example, the times when you were learning to drive a car. You were faced with a problem that seemed insurmountable. You had 3 pedals but only 2 feet with which to operate them. The first thing was to become aware of the complexity of the task. Release the clutch slowly, the car is too fast, there are jerks, press the accelerator pedal while releasing the clutch, the right foot for the brake, but the clutch has to come in, or you'll get another jolt. Millions of mental signals, always thinking, using your head, what do I do? I'm aware, alert and, after 1,000 trials, errors and repeated efforts, the day comes when you get in your car and drive off. No hesitation, no jerks, no thoughts. Driving has become completely natural, and how did you do it? With great difficulty. With training and a lot of attention on the present, on what was only happening in the moment. You know how to regulate your mind when it comes to physical work, such as teaching your feet and hands to coordinate their efforts to drive a car. The process is less well known but works the same in the emotional universe. You have learned the habits you have now by using and reinforcing them throughout your life. You feel unhappy, angry, hurt and frustrated automatically because that is how you learned to think a long time ago. In the same way, you can learn to choose behavior, habits that free you from suffering. No one says it's easy, but what's the alternative? To continue as you are. Some people drift into becoming psychotic, depressed, or living an automaton and orderly grey life rather than taking charge of themselves and managing the actions that will shape their lives. What we are talking about here is the possibility of choosing happiness. Perhaps this choice might ultimately be less complicated for you than some of the things that complicate your life on a daily basis. This choice, this commitment to one's own happiness, passes through different stations such as choosing health over illness. There is evidence to support the theory that people make some kind of unconscious choice, somehow choosing to have tumors, arthritis, heart disease, accidents, and many other ailments, including cancer, ailments that have always been thought to happen to people by chance. In the treatment of the seriously ill, some researchers have begun to believe that the way to alleviate illness is to help the patient not to desire it in whatever form it takes. For example, a 36-year-old woman was trapped in what she considered a horrible marriage situation. She decided on the 15th of January that on the 10th of March she would leave her relationship with her husband. On the 28th of February she developed a fever of 40 degrees and began vomiting uncontrollably. This became a recurring situation. Every time she plucked up the courage to decide to leave her relationship with her husband, she would get the flu or an attack of indigestion. She was choosing. It was easier to get sick than to deal with the guilt, fear, shame, and the unknown that separation entailed. One parameter for understanding the impact of the choices we make is to check the extent to which the emotions you feel prevent you from doing what you want to do. You are immobilized when you can't address your loved ones affectionately even if you want to. You can't work on a project that interests you. You sit around the house all day thinking about your problems. You don't make love and you would like to. You don't play or take part in other activities you enjoy because of an unpleasant feeling you carry around with you. You don't dare to introduce yourself to a person you are attracted to. You avoid talking to someone even though you realize that a simple friendly gesture would improve your relationship. You can't sleep because something is bothering you. You can't think clearly because you're angry. You say something heavy and unfair to someone you care about. One of the ways to combat stasis, however small, is to learn to live in the present moment without procrastination. Avoiding the present moment is almost a disease in our culture, where we are continually conditioned to sacrifice the present for the future. We believe that happiness is something that will happen tomorrow if we do the right thing or get lucky. Remembering, wishing, hoping, regretting, and repenting are the most common and most dangerous tactics for avoiding the present. The great station, the one that is connected to all the tracks on the route that the train of your choices has to take, is to love yourself. One way of understanding love would be the ability and willingness to allow loved ones to be what they choose for themselves, without wanting to change them to do what pleases you or seems right to you. This attitude towards others comes from loving yourself, deciding that you are important. When you have recognized your value, you will have no need for others to reinforce you by conforming their behavior to your instructions. Under no circumstances is it healthier to hate yourself than to love yourself. Even if you have behaved in a way that displeases you, hating yourself will only lead you to immobilize and harm yourself. Let the mistake or error be a lesson to you, make a resolution not to repeat it, but do not associate it with your self-esteem or self-worth. Another important season is the love of the body. As is well known, we have accepted the stereotype of beauty that has been sold to us and its socio-cultural messages. Depilate, deodorize and scent your body with perfume, apply makeup, fill out or operate yourself. Implicit in all this is the idea that there is something unpleasant about the natural self, and that the only way to be attractive is to be artificial. It becomes confusing to distinguish between what we really like and what the celluloid, catwalk and cosmetics industry says we should like. Choosing to love one's own body results in taking steps away from the oppression of the imposed image, because no part of the body is too much of anything. The free eye sees beauty in every difference. An oak tree is no more beautiful than a home oak, nor a rose less beautiful than a tulip. Think of how you see your dog, you look at it with love and enjoy its beauty. Whether you find the dog beautiful or ugly doesn't matter at all, you are able to be enraptured just by looking at the beauty of that dog, because you are not concerned about possessing that beauty. Beauty is just a concept that we have learned. Someone once made us believe that there are beautiful things and ugly things, just as someone made you believe that there are good things and bad things. Beauty is nothing more than a concept, nothing more than a belief. But if you believe in that concept of beauty, you will base all your power on it. It is essential to understand that staying in a self-destructive posture, such as not loving oneself, is a survival reaction that we developed in childhood with all its meaning and sense of adaptation to what we had to live with. And we can understand that in adulthood it continues to have its retributions. Some of them would be being able to avoid the risks involved in establishing effective relationships with others, and thus eliminating any possibility of being rejected or censured. Finding it easier to remain the way you are. As long as you are worthless and undeserving, there is no point in trying to grow and develop or to be better and happier. Getting pity, attention, and even approval, all of which is a good substitute for the risky business of committing to a loving relationship. Have reason to blame yourself for your own misfortunes, so you can complain or get depressed without having to do anything about it. These are paths you take to continue to cling to your old ways of thinking and acting. It is less risky to throw yourself away than to try to lift yourself up. But the only true test of life is growth, so the refusal to become a self-loving person is a choice akin to death. Compulsive, bred and love, behavior. Compulsion is a term used in psychoanalysis, defining an apparently healthy subject who exhibits irresistible addictive or obsessive behavior in the face of a certain subjugating situation. It is the inability to know when we have had enough of anything. We will use our relationship with food as a tool of analysis, because eating is a metaphor for the way we live and the way we love. Characteristics such as an excess of fantasy and drama, the need to control and the desire for the forbidden are behaviors that deprive us of finding harmony in what we eat or in our relationships. Faced with high rates of cardiovascular disease, obesity, and the suffering that comes with it, we turn to diets. But diets don't work because food and weight are the symptoms, not the problem. Focusing on weight is a way of not paying attention to the deeper reasons we turn to food, which have to do with a lack of care, trust, and love, a consequence of neglect, lived abuse, unexpressed anger and pain, and the need to protect ourselves from further hurt. Diets keep us in a childlike state, focused on something external to us, on what we are allowed to eat, when and how much, on which our sense of well-being and our sense of self-worth depend. When we are good and follow the diet, we praise ourselves as our parents did. When we are bad and go off the diet, we scold ourselves as well, thus perpetuating our dependence. We wait all our lives for tenderness and beauty to come in the guise of thinness or in the form of infatuation, and it can be devastating when they don't come. And they never come because you will never be thin enough, or you will never be loved enough. People attack themselves with food because they don't know that they deserve better. They attack themselves because they have been attacked. They do not become unhappy adults with self-destructive desires and behaviors because they have been traumatized, but because they have repressed them. Food is our love, eating is our way of being loved. Food was accessible when our parents were not. Food didn't get up and leave, it didn't say no to us, it didn't hit us, it didn't get drunk, it was always there, it tasted good. Food was warm when we were cold. Food became the best form of love we knew. Food is the stage on which we're enacted our childhood. If we were insulted, we will be insulted by food. The extent to which we are violent to ourselves is proportional to the degree of violence we receive. If we were not loved in the way we needed to be loved, we cannot love ourselves in that way either. Compulsive behavior is a lack of self-love, an expression of our belief that we are not worth enough and not worthy of being loved. When we binge eat, we are recreating familiar feelings of loss of control, fear, frustration. Compulsion is desperation on an emotional level. The substances, people or activities that we compulsively consume are those that we believe can free us from despair, or help us to tolerate and buffer our experience for fear that our pain will destroy us if we confront it. The very object of compulsion is to protect us from the pain that is associated with love. An obsession is something that freezes feelings in time. You transfer the pain of being alive to the pain of being fat. It is important to explore the messages we receive as children and how we interpret them into forms of self-hatred. I did something bad, and that's why Mummy won't come back, because I'm bad. People lie, and it's best not to believe what they say. I need and love too much. Love hurts. If I could do everything they tell me, I'd be good and then Mummy would love me. If I were good on the inside, they wouldn't hit me on the outside. It's better to eat than to get attached to someone, because food doesn't go away and mothers do. Our mother leaves us and we decide we don't deserve to be loved. Our father is emotionally distant and we decide we are too demanding. Children have to deny what causes them pain, they have to hold on with love to those who mistreat them. There is no other way out, the other option is to be alone. The difference between someone and no one is the difference between life and death. Children have to invent complex fantasies to turn the people who mistreat and abandon them into people who love and care for them. As children we had nothing to do with why we were abused, we thought we did, because blaming ourselves gave us some ability to control it. If every time my mother hit me, I ate a packet of biscuits and felt fat and ugly, I could easily justify her attitude. Mum hits me because I'm fat and ugly. Mum is not crazy, she knows what she is doing, she knows what is best for me. In short, we decide that love hurts and that we don't deserve to be loved, and we live protecting ourselves from being hurt again. And there is no better protection than wrapping ourselves in a compulsion. We spend the rest of our lives trying to protect ourselves and looking for someone to love us the way we needed to be loved as children. We spend the rest of our lives eating, drinking, smoking, working, so that we never have to return to that place of unbearable pain. Often parents do not allow themselves to acknowledge the suffering they experienced as children. Instead of expressing their pain, they pass it on. The fantasy entitled, "When I Lose Weight," was constructed to explain the despair of our childhood because we needed something to take responsibility for the pain. We think that when we lose weight, the people we love will love us and our anguish will disappear. We learn to get out of control with food and to control ourselves with people. What we don't allow ourselves to do in relationships, we allow ourselves to do with food. We eat the biggest portion, we reserve the best for ourselves. In the rest of our lives, we are continually on a diet of feelings, because at some point we learned that in order to be loved we could not rebel as we were. If I want to be loved, I cannot ask for what I really want. We practice to perfection the art of pretending. Being controlled in life is what precipitates the out of control of whatever it is. Binge eating is our way of saying, "You can't beat me." Even though I am vulnerable and believe I need your love, even though to please you I modify what I say and what I do, there is a part of me that will remain intact no matter what. This part cannot be bought or sold, it knows that it is worthy of love, pleasure, and satisfaction. This is the part of me that eats. In relationships, we look for others to fulfill us, and they must show us their love as we want them to. They must do everything that our parents did not do. We want them to take responsibility for our well-being. If we do not believe we are worthy of appreciation, respect, and tenderness, we cannot give it to ourselves and will try to get it from others at any cost. Just as we have good reasons for binge eating, we also have good reasons for choosing inappropriate partners. If I don't know that I have value for myself, I won't be able to choose lovers who know it. My way of eating and my way of loving spring from the same source, the models of love I absorbed from my parents and the image of myself that I had built on the basis of that love, eating to put feelings aside, to make myself disappear. The avoidance dynamic. The struggle with suffering caused by thoughts of painful situations from the past can be similar to the struggle to keep dark clouds from gathering in the sky and trapping you. They are like constant attempts to search for clear skies. However, experience tells us all that clouds are not something we can control, they do sometimes arise. It is similar to what your experience tells you, you can't avoid the memories, they come, and the more you try not to have them, the more they are there again. As humans, we remember, and sometimes memories come to mind like clouds that appear in the sky without our noticing, obscuring everything in their shadow. Your experience may be like a sky that is frequently covered with gray clouds, and instead of looking up and letting the clouds run their course, you are trapped in the cloud, as if stuck to it, inside it. Being trapped, you don't get to see the cloud or the sky that contains it or the earth, because you are completely enveloped in the cloud, fused to it. Being like this, you are at the mercy of the cloud without being able to do what matters to you in your life. You live as a victim of the cloud, and you think that's all you can do. But you can watch the clouds from a distance, greet them when they come into your life, see what they bring you, what they want to tell you. You can see how they sometimes obscure what you have in hand and breathe, hold the feeling that awakens in you and welcome the learning they show you. Undoubtedly, the clouds will pass, the sun will rise again and probably come back as many times as you need until the avoidance dynamics, which is one of the most important points to discover for all that it has to do with conditioning one's life. Expecting the solution to come from outside, demanding it and reacting when it is not achieved, using all kinds of strategies to get something without risking the pain of refusal, compensating our need for control with dishonest attitudes, engaging in avoidance compulsive behavior and projecting responsibility onto others, are the patterns that we are now going to reflect on and which detail this avoidance dynamic. Expectations. In order not to feel fear, we mask it by acting out, hence our addictive compulsive behavior. We place our unsatisfied needs on others, especially those close to us. The other becomes a container for our projections. Behind our judgments there is something we desire or expect from someone. Expectations try to fill the hole inside. Instead of feeling fear and pain as a part of life, we transform that energy into the expectation that someone else will fill it, and we demand it. We blame others for what they should change or for everything they don't give us. 2. Reaction and demand. Expectations are the fuel for reactions and demands. From our earliest experiences, we all have many needs that were not satisfied, and this makes us move between reaction and demand. Like any child who does not get what he or she wants, we act out by having tantrums. That's the reaction part, and we do it with the feeling that we deserve it. That's the demand part. You extract what you need from that experience and stop creating those thoughts in the present. Then you allow the clouds to run their course in the sky of your life as you follow your life course. In order to follow this course, I consider it fundamental to understand the dynamics of avoidance, which is one of the most important points to discover because of its conditioning effect on one's own life. Expecting the solution to come from outside, demanding it and reacting when it is not achieved, using all kinds of strategies to achieve something without risking the pain of refusal, compensating our need for control with dishonest attitudes, engaging in avoidance compulsive behavior and projecting responsibility onto others, are the guidelines that we are now going to reflect on and which detail this avoidance dynamic. 1. Expectation. In order not to feel fear, we mask it by acting out, hence our addictive compulsive behavior. We place our unsatisfied needs on others, especially those close to us. The other becomes a container for our projections. Behind our judgments there is something we desire or expect from someone. Expectations try to fill the hole inside. Instead of feeling fear and pain as a part of life, we transform that energy into the expectation that someone else will fill it, and we demand it. We blame others for what they should change or for everything they don't give us. 2. Reaction and demand. Expectations are the fuel for reactions and demands. From our earliest experiences, we all have many needs that were not satisfied, and this makes us move between reaction and demand. Like any child who does not get what he or she wants, we act out by having tantrums. That is the reaction part, and we do it with the feeling that we deserve it. That is the demand part. Our behavior is being fueled by the resentment of past hurts and the panic of not getting what we need. The cause of our reactions and demands is the refusal to feel the fear and pain of disappointment regarding our expectations. Some examples of reactions are the desire to binge eat, telling yourself that your suffering will never end, comparing how you feel with how you want to feel, comparing the present experience with your past experience, comparing yourself with someone else. 3. Strategies. Strategies are the way we demonstrate our reactions and demands. The way we affect the other person to change their behavior and get what we want instead of expressing ourselves directly and honestly. A hammer strategy, demand and condemnation. We use the hammer to intimidate and dominate aggressively from a "I deserve it and I want it now." If we don't get it, we condemn. Behind the condemnation of blaming the other is the demand for the other to change. In this way, we do not have to feel the pain of not getting what we want, nor do we have to assume our responsibility. B-hook strategy, manipulation. Persuading, convincing, conditioning, influencing behavior in such a way that the other person will consider that their opinions and behavior have their own criteria, but behind their decisions there is planning based on our interests for our own benefit. We manipulate through money, affection, eroticism, intelligence, power, age, guilt, flattery. Looking good or pouting or passing over everything, pretending that we do not care about anything. See knife strategy, revenge. When someone hurts us, if we don't react immediately, we incorporate the pain. We keep the wound under a mask pretending that it doesn't matter, but we won't stay calm until the hurt is repaid. We can take revenge on someone because they have touched wounds from the past that are reopened, and we can do this by punishing, isolating, demeaning the other person, being sarcastic or with indifference and inattention. And the funny thing is that deep down we seek their attention. Begging bowl strategy, victimhood. This is the energy of supplication motivated by such a sense of panic and loss that it prevents us from doing anything else. With it we humiliate and disqualify ourselves, and the more we use it, the worse we feel. Strategy of the overturned begging bowl, resignation. Helplessness, resignation. As victims, we retreat in despair because we have lost the energy to change the other and retreat into our cave, that familiar and safe, but isolated and self-marginalized place. From that place, deep down we long for rescue. Strategies may work up to a point, but, in reality, when we use them we are not connecting with the other person and we feel lonely and separate. 4. Compensations. When we don't do what we really want to do, we have to find a way to compensate and maintain our control. Compensations cover up our fear. They are unconscious and habitual behaviors that protect the inner child from the threat of pain. We are always compensating, adopting a role to keep ourselves safe. We can point to 4 basic styles of compensation, of protection. Indulging. We indulge so that we don't have to confront someone or receive their anger or rejection. We try to soften the energy, and we can fool ourselves by justifying this attitude as a good deed, but to please others is to sell your power and dignity. I don't know the key to success, but I know the key to failure is trying to please everyone. Woody Allen. Be control. Caring instead of being intimidated, we try to control the energy, to move outwards and overcome it. We can play the role of nurturing parents and achieve dependence on others, or use our power in a tyrannical way by overwhelming others intellectually. We shift energy from the body to the head in order to feel safe, secure, and in control. Cynicism and sarcasm are common attitudes in this compensation. See fighting. Rebelliousness. We face up to defying any invasion or abuse by trying to overcome the energy. Anger and reaction become our way of not feeling pain. We can become addicted to adversity. Isolating. Closing in on oneself. By withdrawing from the energy we distance ourselves from the threatening object. Resigned, we seek refuge in solitude to protect our sensitivity, our frightened child. Compensations form a belief system based on the deprivation of love and support we suffered in childhood. It is like a film that, in our minds, determines the way we see and feel the world. When we please, we believe that it is not safe to be forceful and direct. When we control, we believe that if we don't, something scary will happen. When we fight, we believe that either we do, or we will be controlled. When we withdraw, we believe that the world is an unfeeling place to stay in. This is the film of a boy, of a girl, wounded. 5. Addictions. Much of the behavior we consider normal is a form of addiction. Addiction is a choice we make repeatedly not to be present, not to enter the layer of vulnerability, not to feel the emptiness. It keeps fears and pain from surfacing. Addiction is taking my happiness and placing it outside of me. If the outside works the way I want it to, I will be happy. If I don't control it, I think I am miserable and despair. There are some obvious addictions such as drugs, food, sweets, that we put into our bodies in an attempt to alleviate the pain and anxiety that is created when our control and protection begins to falter. The way we relate to food is a telling example. The moment you turn to food to avoid what you feel, you are saying flatly, I have no choice but to anesthetize. There are things I cannot feel, understand or overcome. You are saying, since there is no possibility of change, I might as well eat, good things exist for everyone but me, so I might as well eat, or, food is the only true pleasure in life, so I eat. We experience a false freedom in being able to choose what and how much to eat. We substitute a lack of freedom in other areas compulsively in the face of food. This reasoning can also be transferred to other facets of consumption. Other subtle and profound addictions can be observed that characterize patterns of behavior. The way we obsessively structure time. The refined and socially rewarding image. To do, to make achievements and progress, to get somewhere. Discipline, intensity, even meditation. What identifies a behavior as addictive, with subtle addictions, is not what we do, but how we do it. Addictions shelter us from our anxiety and pain, they are the only apparent way to maintain some control. Without them we are much more sensitive and vulnerable. But the journey to ourself, to get in touch with our feelings, is blocked by addiction. When, without realizing it, you believe that deep down there is something wrong with you that you have to hide from everyone in order to get love, then you go around ashamed of who you are. You convince yourself that your best and only recourse is to be ashamed of yourself and try as hard as you can to correct yourself, trying as hard as you can to be recognized. But you are not a mistake, you are not a problem to be solved. And you won't discover this until you are willing to stop banging your head against the wall of shame, closing in on yourself and fearing yourself. Our job is not to change what we do, but to be aware enough, to be curious and tender enough, to let the lies come out, so that the old decisions on which the addiction is based disappear. Honesty, not force, is what can break the compulsion. Awareness, not deprivation, dictates what you eat. Presence, not shame, changes how you see yourself and trust. When you stop struggling, suffering, striving and deceiving yourself about food and your body, when you stop manipulating and controlling, when you relax and listen to the underlying truth, something greater than fear comes over you. 6. Projections. Let's imagine that one person is the projector and the other is the screen. We project on it the film we want to see. We make the other person responsible for making us feel the way we feel. When we make a projection, we are not at our center. We are passing on the cause of our feelings to another person and the responsibility for them, with the consequent burden on them. And, at the same time, we are handing over our power to that person, selling our freedom. We are projecting our need to be cared for. There is a very deep longing of our child to be taken into account, loved, supported and not controlled, ignored or manipulated. Our child projects onto a friend or a partner the role of the loving parents she never had. A projection is the reconstruction of a past situation. When an encounter with a person reopens one of our wounds, it seems to us that it is the person who is causing us pain. We give them the power to make us feel pain, and we project onto them the pains we had in the past. There is a type of projection that translates into a compulsive pattern, that of reproducing the dominant relationships of childhood in an attempt to complete unfinished lessons. We pick and choose people who for some reason stimulate the reopening of old wounds of inattention. People who mirror patterns that were in our family system. Others act as mirrors. We are attracted and at the same time repelled by the parts of ourselves that we see reflected in them. This is at the root of whether we like or dislike someone. Body scanner dynamics, or how to connect with the ventral parasympathetic. Think of the body scanner as a mental X-ray that slowly scans your body. Here's how to do it step by step. 1. Make yourself comfortable. Start by getting comfortable. Lie down or sit in a position that allows you to stretch your limbs easily. 2. Concentrate. Close your eyes and begin to concentrate on your breathing. Notice the sensation of your breath filling your lungs as you inhale and leaving them as you exhale. 3. Choose where to start. Start anywhere you like: left hand, left foot, right hand, right foot, top of the head. Concentrate on that point while continuing to breathe slowly and deeply. 4. Pay attention. Open your awareness to sensations of pain, tension, discomfort, or anything out of the ordinary. 5. Go slowly. Spend between 20 seconds and 1 minute observing these sensations. 6. Acknowledge the sensation. If you begin to feel pain and discomfort, acknowledge and sit with the emotions that cause these sensations. Accept them without criticizing them. For example, if you feel frustrated and angry, don't judge yourself for these emotions. Observe them and let them pass. 7. Breathe. Keep breathing, imagining the pain and tension decreasing with each breath. 8. Let go. Slowly release your mental awareness of that specific body part and redirect it to your next area of attention. You may find it helpful to imagine releasing one part of the body as you exhale and moving on to the next as you inhale. 9. Travel the length of the body. Continue the exercise along the length of your body in a way that makes sense to you, whether you go up and down or up one side and down the other. 10. Notice the thoughts that arise. As you continue to walk through your body, notice when your thoughts start to wander. This will happen more than once, so don't worry. Don't think of it as a failure, just get your thoughts back on track again. Just bring your attention back to where you were in your body. 11. Visualize and breathe. Once you have finished scanning parts of your body, let your awareness run through your whole body. Visualize this as a liquid filling a mold. Continue to inhale and exhale slowly as you meditate with this awareness of your whole body for several seconds. 12. Come back. Slowly release your concentration and return your attention to your surroundings.